Hello and welcome back to another episode of Focus on K-12, EdTech and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. Today, I talk with Vriti Saraf, the CEO and founder of K20 Educators. We discuss some innovative programs from around the world and how she's breaking down silos and improving collaboration. Let's dive in.
I'm Vriti Saraf. I'm the founder and CEO of K20 Educators, and I have been a teacher, a dean, a network director. I've built schools around the world, and I've been a part of private schools, charter schools, and public schools internationally and locally.
All right. It sounds like a big gig there in the middle. So tell me a little bit about K20 Educators. What led you to this idea to build a new way to collaborate?
K20 is a social learning ecosystem for educators around the world. We essentially want to make sure educators are evolving as the world is evolving. And we have a lot of interesting ways to engage educators and empower them so that they can collaborate, connect, but also access the world's greatest resources. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but the journey towards it is actually has been a really interesting journey for me, but I think for other people too, which is before the pandemic, I actually spent 3.5 years traveling around the world building schools. I was part of a startup that was building 30 schools around the world. And one of my jobs, which was totally miraculous, was that I got to travel to different campuses around the world, learning from innovative educators. And so I spent time in Bali, I spent time in India, in China, in the US, in the UK, in Reggio Emilia, Italy. And it was a really enlightening experience. One, because I saw that there were such incredible innovations all around the world. But the thing that was really jarring for me was that educators were building completely in isolation. Every educator that I met was building these incredible pedagogies and plans and engagements for students, but they were doing them completely from ground up. They actually weren't engaging other educators from beyond their school or their district to build something. And so it occurred to me, why aren't we as an education industry collaborating more and connecting more if all of our goals are the same, which is to progress the next generation? And so I started doing research on how do educators actually collaborate, and there's three main ways. They do it through conferences, through institutional organizations and professional learning organizations, and through Reddit and Facebook. Problem with conferences is that they're usually too expensive for most rural schools, and they're really hard to access, and they're very short-lived. There's no sort of sustained efficacy data on that. And then the second one, the institutional organizations are usually connected to schools, and they're usually top-down, so it's hard for educators to actually innovate in that. And then the third one, through Facebook and Reddit, that's probably the most powerful way that educators connect. But the problem with it is that it's uncurated. There's a lot of noise, and it's very heavy in solicitation. And it also isn't always the most engaging, because once you actually get to a certain threshold of users, it just becomes so big, it's hard to manage. And so that's where the idea came from. I wanted to create a space for educators where they could have meaningful interactions and work with each other in a way that's actually sustained.
Excellent. So before we dive deeper into that, I want to take a half a step back. You talked about building these schools all over the world. What were some of the most interesting programs or ideas that you saw on your travels?
There are two stick out most specific. So there's one called Reggio Emilia, Italy. It's a town in Italy, and there's a pedagogy that came out of it after World War II called Reggio Emilia. And the most magical part about Reggio Emilia is that it actually recognizes students as early as the age of 3 as citizens and as beings that have their own identity that needs to be recognized, right? So it's not that you're thinking of children as empty vessels that need to be filled, but you're actually engaging with their prior experiences, with their relationships to the environment, to each other, to their family members, to their teachers, to the materials around them. And you're actually recognizing that in a way that allows them to build upon their passions and their identities. And it creates an emergent curriculum instead of a curriculum that's top down. So educators will actually work with students and understand the student fully, and then create the projects afterwards. So I thought that was just such a phenomenal practice that they're trying to actually escalate to higher levels, grade levels. But right now it's sort of a ELC specific one. But I have many other examples I could talk about, for hours.
Absolutely. Well, you said you had two, so get us to that second one.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I know where we're going, but I'd love to hear more.
So the second one is there's a school in Bali called the Green School. They've actually branched out now to, I believe, New Zealand and Tulum and possibly South Africa. And they're the world's most sustainable school. So their entire campus is built out of bamboo. It's pretty phenomenal, but that's not the most impressive part. The most impressive part is that they have an entirely project-based and experiential curriculum starting from kindergarten. And in high school, they have this really interesting process for how their kids earn credit. So the kids actually pitch for credits. And so, for example, if there's a student that says, I'm going to build a biobus that is fueled from the kitchen grease, they can actually pitch for bio credits, chem credits, physics credits, and be able to apply those credits to their high school graduation and even college credits. And that process of allowing the student to critically and to critically create these projects that will allow them to learn life skills and allow them to gain credits in their high school without giving them any superfluous content that might not be relevant to them is such a better way of spending your high school career rather than learning things that you really don't care about.
Absolutely. So we've got these interesting programs from around the world. We've got these incredible educators all over who are doing just magnificent work. So what's the next step then, right? So how do we dive in a little deeper? What does the collaboration look like?
That's a great question. So there's two ways that we engage educators on the platform. One is the platform itself. So the K20 platform, we have this ecosystem that allows educators to get the things that they need in terms of professional learning content. So we have a library of professional learning that they can access, and we prioritize the content that's most important to educators right now, specifically remote learning, project-based learning, hybrid learning, things like that. And a lot of our resources are free, so it's really great for them to access that there instead of having to go into sort of that wild pool of Google. We also have a job board that helps educators access the types of jobs that are really meaningful to them. So what I mean by that is educators right now have an unparalleled opportunity to earn supplemental income because there are so many remote jobs out there that will allow educators to spend an hour here, hour there, earning some extra income, especially because educators, we all know, don't get paid enough. We actually curate the job board in a way that actually creates the opportunities that educators can access based on their profile and their portfolio. And then we also have ways for educators to collaborate that is much more action oriented than, say, a Facebook might be. So we still have groups and we still have forums and we still have messaging. We also have what we call projects. And the projects allow educators to create these outcome based projects that will allow educators to connect with another educator across the world. So for example, if I'm an educator in Florida, for example, and I really want to create a pen pal project with someone from around the world, I can post that on our platform and I can open it up to any other educators from, say, South Asia and invite them to be a pen pal with me. And once that project has been picked up by another educator, then you can actually take that project off of the platform and continue collaborating on our platform. So that's one sort of aspect of what we're doing. But the other aspect is how we're empowering educators to be innovative in their own field. We have think tanks, masterminds, incubators, socials, we have conferences, and a lot of other opportunities to basically engage educators beyond just the platform itself.
All right. So some of those people are probably familiar with, probably two that jumped out to me, right? Think tanks and masterminds. So tell me a little bit more about what those are.
Yeah, so the masterminds are Skillshare events that our members actually facilitate on a monthly basis. We actually just partnered with ISTE to facilitate a blockchain and NFT Skillshare mastermind. We had our first one last week and it was really phenomenal. And the purpose of them is so that educators can learn from each other something that they are either passionate about, have expertise in, or don't know anything about. And they're completely free and they're completely facilitated by our members so that there's a lot of empowerment that comes with that. And another one of our masterminds is facilitated by one of our members who's based in Alaska, another one that's based in Scotland. They actually met at one of our conferences and they run an AR VR mastermind and they're teaching other educators to do just incredible things with completely free tools like missions to Mars and diving deep into Picasso paintings and analyzing the brushstrokes and doing quizzes that are physically oriented and very cool things like that. So that's the mastermind piece. And we have a lot of those coming up soon. And our members are welcome to facilitate any that they prefer. And the other one is the think tank. So think tanks are basically our way of flipping the research model. So we know that there's so much research out there that comes from above. And by above, I mean higher education institutions, professional learning organizations, government, things like that. And it takes a really long time to trickle down to educators. And educators are often not trusting of that type of research because it's not them who's done it. It's not their peers that have done it. So we're trying to flip that by empowering educators to be the researchers themselves. And so our think tanks are 4 to 6 month action research fellowships that are actually sponsored by a for-profit institution that is interested in the research and has no influence on the research itself. And educators basically spend 4 to 6 months not only researching the topic at hand, but doing participatory action research with their students and doing the entire thing as a build in public project. And if you're not familiar with build in public, it's basically a way to tell the world about what you're doing from day one, including your successes, your struggles, your growth areas, your mistakes, so that the world is learning alongside you. And so our first think tank, I'm really excited about it. We just partnered with GatherTown, which is an avatar-based platform, and they are helping us facilitate a virtual world building think tank for educators. And we have Terrence, who is based in Scotland, one of our AR/VR mastermind facilitators. He's actually facilitating and leading the entire thing. And we're getting 5 educators from around the world. Applications are about to open up in a couple weeks. And they are going to engage in a 4-month research fellowship that they're going to have competitions in. They're going to build virtual maps in. They're going to engage with the GatherTown team and provide them feedback on how to make it better for education. It's going to be pretty phenomenal. I'm very excited about that.
Excellent. So last question, why now?
Yeah, great question. And that's a question I wish people would ask me more often, which is COVID has changed the way that we engage with each other. Our relationships are online first when they weren't before. And educators have actually come online in much larger masses than they have ever before. In the United States, 100,000 educators came online for the first time last year. And because we have such an online first way of operating right now, it's really important that we maximize the resources that are available online. And it's also important that we curate them because there's so much out there. There's so much content out there that we're constantly consuming. For educators who have very little time, it's important that we actually allow them to access the things that they really want in that moment, instead of having to research for 5 hours and then finding the one thing that's going to help them for one lesson the next day. And so this is a perfect time to not only help educators curate those resources, but to engage with each other on a global level. The world has never been more accessible than it has been now. So we're really excited to create a smaller education industry by bringing everybody closer together.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, Vriti, and for sharing your story with us.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dkonopelko. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.